Hello, welcome to another episode of the Happiness Revolution, where I talk about stuff that will make you happy. This is not my own wisdom that I'm talking about. I'm talking about stuff that's been known for centuries, but we've been ignoring it for whatever reason, mainly because we've rejected spirituality. But when I say spirituality, people think it's just airy-fairy stuff that doesn't have any rational relevance to our day-to-day life. So these videos are exactly the opposite of that. They are very much about practical ways to change your life. So anyway, today's video is going to talk about ISIL, because we need to ISIL, which is this so-called Islamic State, which has taken over bits of Syria and Iraq. And the reason why we need to talk about it in this part of this happiness revolution is to understand or get an idea of how we are going to move from where we are to a happiness revolution situation, where we're all living in one world happily together without conflict, or without much conflict. Definitely not anything on the scale of what we've got right now. So how will that happen? And this is the reason why I'm talking about it, is just to give an example of how that will happen. So I want to talk about ISIL. Let's call it ISIL for now, because they've had so many names. And what's really happening, to give you some background. So, to go back a little bit, before ISIL even came along, we were talking about this so-called Syrian civil war. But what you hear on the news is far from reality. Our British or Western the way the Western or British media would like to portray what's happening in Syria. You have to remember that a lot of Syrians love Syria. So and by the way, I have family that are in Syria, so I know to some extent what I'm talking about. I even have a grandmother who's moved back to Syria because she prefers to be in Syria rather than the safer neighbouring Jordan. So, and she lives in Damascus quite happily, just to give you some insight into what I'm about to say now. So, and also you won't hear things in the media like President Bashar of Syria got 90% of the votes in Syria recently. So, but you don't get that sort of courage, because that doesn't go with the story the Western media is trying to tell about the situation there. They're trying to make it as if it's absolutely terrible, it's crazy. Those people in Syria are basically from that so-called, one of those Muslim countries, where in Muslim countries they're completely mental, and they're people you just can't understand. They don't think like the rest of humanity, so we shouldn't treat them like the rest of humanity. They need Western help. That is the message that's being thrown out there, and I'm trying not to go into it too much because it will just go on forever, but just be aware that what you see in the media is so far from reality, it's almost not reality. Yes, there are people who are escaping from Syria, but even before the so-called civil war, in which mostly there are people from outside Syria fighting, so it's not really much of a civil war, is it? And just to finally add a bit more to the picture, Syrians quite widely claim that it is the CIA who are orchestrating all of this, including ISIL, who are basically encouraging these kind of a minority of people who run ISIL, are funded and given weapons and all this kind of stuff through the CIA. That's the simple way. You know, when you hear stuff like there's some complicated way they get their weapons, well, that's the complicated way. Anyway, So, and it's not just a conspiracy theory, because once we stop demonizing these other countries and thinking they're a bit strange, we start realizing they're just like us. So we've got governments, we've got prime ministers who we know are murderers, Tony Blair especially, and all these other people who, whichever government we've had, they all seem to have the same agenda anyway, so they're all murderers, one after the other. But we don't go and revolt against them, so we should expect the same of the Syrians and whoever is in the Middle East, whatever. We're not going to suddenly revolt against them, even if they're not perfect. They're far from perfect. So that gives you an idea of what's really happening. But these talks, these episodes, are to do with finding solutions, not just talking about and commenting on what's happening in the media and what's happening in the world. What is the solution? How can we solve these problems? Well, first of all, we need to become more united people, and we will become more united, like for example us British people or us English people, we should become more united. Right now, each neighbour is completely disunited from the other neighbour. It doesn't really know what's happening and so I know all these things, but even my neighbours don't know these things. So what the government is doing is taking advantage of this idea of divide and rule, is keeping us separated, keeping us materialistic, which makes us think in a selfish way, which keeps us in separate little groups, individuals. One family knows nothing about the other family, even if we're living completely next to each other. Okay, and so it's taking advantage of this divide and rule situation, which stems from materialism. And so we're disunited and we're easily controlled and easily fed lots of rubbish news. So part of the revolution, part of the solution is becoming more united, so we become more educated about the reality of the world. And when we become more united, also what will happen is we'll be able to put forward serious people that will help govern us. So I don't want to go into all the different forms of government, how exactly that will go through, that will happen from here to the better situation we look forward to. But in brief, we have to use the system that exists and then slowly mold the system to a better system. So for now, what we should aim to do is become united so that we can put forward a good political party. We might not agree with political parties as such, but whatever. For now, we will put forward a better political party that can stand up for government and be voted for seriously and gain control of the government. That's what we need to aim for, and then later on we can aim for better forms of government, maybe smaller, more devolved governments, but I don't necessarily agree with that. Big governments are not bad, it's just the morals behind them and how it's run. So it's morality and our morality that needs to change. As I said in a previous video, in the 4 steps to happiness, the happiness revolution, personal happiness and the happiness revolution, what we need to do is change. Our governments come from among us. Let's stop pointing at the governments and saying it's all their fault, it's our fault. They are not aliens. Our prime ministers, our presidents, whatever you want to call them, are not aliens. They haven't come from space, they have come from among us. So if we aren't perfect, and we certainly are not perfect, we know that. If we're honest, we know we are not perfect. We're far, far from perfect. We are disunited because of ourselves. We need to start caring about our our neighbours, our societies, and start changing ourselves. So step 1, change ourselves, then we will choose better governments that won't cause trouble and wind up other other countries and stuff like that, and cause these other problems where there are definitely people being killed in Syria, by the way. I'm not denying that, but it's part of a wider problem, and it starts with us. And the only solution is not sending people our own murdering, I don't want to say murdering armies, but the people who are in the armies, we've seen the adverts. They're just taking advantage of people who don't have jobs and don't have anything else to do, sending them into armies and getting them killed for the sake of the politicians who are running things. So what we need to do to wind this up is become better people so that we can get better governments, to stop winding up other governments and destroying other countries, and the world will be more at peace. Thank you for watching.